Hello everyone, welcome to the second session of our webinar on QSP. Today, Géraldine will present the second QSP case study. We will now listen to Géraldine.
Thank you very much, Pauline, for the introduction. Welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining this second session. So yesterday, I went over a small introduction about QSP modeling, and then I really have shown you a step-by-step example using a fairly complex model for an FAH inhibitor. Today, we're going to move on to the second study, which is very interesting also. We will look at cholesterol metabolism and a PCSK9 inhibitor, and the main goal will be to check what is the influence of taking a model with more or less details, more or less complexity on the predictions we can get from those models. So let's get started. So the original paper from which I have extracted the data is this one. I will follow roughly the same story as in the paper, except that, as I said, I'm going to consider model variance to check the impact on the predictions. So we'll first give you some background introduction, background information on cholesterol metabolism. So circulating cholesterol, in this picture is denoted LDL-C, can actually be captured by LDLR receptors that are sitting on the hepatocyte membrane, and this process will internalize the cholesterol into the liver, while the LDLR receptor are recycled back to the cell membrane. PCSK9 is a molecule that binds to the LDLR receptor and targets it to lysosomal degradation. The molecule we are interested in today is an anti-PCSK9 antibody that sequesters PCSK9. When PCSK9 is sequestered, LDLR is not targeted to lysosomal degradation anymore, which means that we have more LDLR receptor present on the cell membrane, which can capture more circulating cholesterol. And this leads to lower cholesterol concentration in plasma, and that's exactly what we want for a cholesterol-lowering therapy. So the drug we will work with is called RG7652. It is a fully human monoclonal IgG1 antibody directed against PCSK9, and it has been developed as a cholesterol-lowering therapy. The phase 1 has shown that this drug elicits substantial and sustained dose-related LDL-C reductions with an acceptable safety profile. So here again, we are at the time point between phase 1 and phase 2, and by discussing with the team, several questions have popped up, have emerged. The first question is which dose levels should be selected for phase 2. So the selection criteria are pretty clear. First, we would like the dose to lead to an at least 50 milligram per deciliter reduction in the cholesterol levels. That's our efficacy criteria. But at the same time, we would like that the LDL-C levels at nadir, so at the lowest concentration, still stay above 15 milligram per deciliter for at least 80% of the subjects. That's our safety criteria. So we hope to be able, with the model, to simulate different dosing regimens and check which one fulfills this criteria or not. Then the second question is about statin-treated patients. So is there a difference in response for statin-treated patients and untreated patients? So here I need to say that statins are actually the first-line therapy to lower cholesterol, but sometimes it's not sufficient, and that's why we are looking for alternative therapies. Most of the patients that will be included in the phase 2 will already be statin treated. So the question is, will these patients really benefit from the additional anti-PCSK9 therapy or not? And finally, the last question is about patients with familial hypercholesterolemia. So these patients actually have mutations in the LDLR receptor, so they have low concentration of this receptor, and we would like to know if these patients would benefit from the therapy or not. So that's where the clinical questions, and at the same time, we will also address a more methodological question, which is how robust are the predictions if models with varying complexity are used. And to check this, I will consider 3 different models. First, we will have a typical PK/PD model, where we include in the model only the chemical species that have been experimentally measured. Then we're going to consider a slightly more complex model that I will call the mechanistic PK/PD model, where we'll add 1 additional chemical species that has not been experimentally observed. And finally, we will use a full QSP model that is fairly complex. So the typical PK/PD and mechanistic PK/PD models will be quite straightforward to write. So for the moment, I'm going to concentrate on the QSP model, and still following the good practice guidelines, I will first think about the scope of the model. So if we look online about cholesterol metabolism, actually, we can still find very large maps. So that's, for example, the map I have found on the KEGG database that includes a lot of different species. So that's probably quite a lot to consider at first. What I'm going to do is rather to go the other way around and think, what do we absolutely need to include in the model? So what we need to include, given the background information I gave you previously, is, of course, the cholesterol production and degradation, the PCSK9 production, degradation, and inhibition. A key player here is also this LDLR receptor, which is produced and degraded, and of course the interaction between these 3 players. What we could also include in the model is the liver cholesterol, because actually most of the circulating cholesterol in plasma is coming from the liver cholesterol. And if we include liver cholesterol, this would also allow us to include some feedback mechanisms of liver cholesterol on other species via the transcription factor of SREBP2. Before I present you the full QSP model that has been selected, what I would like to address is actually how to draw the scheme for the model. And I will really consider just a subset of the model. And let's assume that we read a sentence like this in the literature. So PCSK9 directs LDLR to lysosomal degradation rather than recycling in hepatocytes. So if we want to draw the impact of PCSK9 on LDLR, one possible scheme would be like this. And in this scheme, what we really stress is that PCSK9 has a negative impact on LDLR. That's highlighted here by the red inhibition arrow. But actually, we can be more precise than this. What we could say is that LDLR is produced and degraded, and that PCSK9 actually increases the degradation of LDLR. And we actually can be even more precise. We can say that PCSK9 binds to LDLR, and that the complex that is formed is degraded. This is even more precise. So this is just a bit to show that you can draw the scheme in very different ways. The more precise you are, the better it is, because you are conveying more information. So that's the full scheme for the QSP model that we will consider. I will not go into the details right now because we will have time to go back to it afterwards. So let's just assume we have the scheme, and now the next step will be to write the equations. And actually, the equations contain more hypotheses than what can be presented in the scheme. And I would like to show you some examples. So let's try to describe this scheme into equations. So PCSK9 is produced and degraded, LDLR also, and both can bind together. And the complex, we don't model it explicitly, but we know it's going to be degraded. So the first option is to say that PCSK9 mediates the degradation of LDLR via simple binding. So we're going to have a production rate a degradation rate, that is just a linear regression, and this binding rate with the binding constant and the concentration of the two chemical species. But actually, we could also say that PCSK9 mediates the degradation of LDLR, but it is not consumed in the process. In this case, we would have the binding term just for LDLR, but not for PCSK9. That would also be an option, depending on what we know about the biology. And actually, for the moment, I'm assuming that everything is linear, but we could also say PCSK9 mediates the degradation of LDLR, but with some saturation mechanism that I could take into account here using a Michaelis-Menten term. So you see that if I write the equations, I really have more information than what I have on the scheme. So it's really important to not only write the equations, but also the corresponding sentences, so that somebody that does not look into the equation will really know all the assumptions put into the model. So that was really about the model structure, about the equations. The next point is about the parameterization. For a given set of equations, there are often several ways to parameterize it. And here we'll give two different examples. First is, actually, we can use a binding rate, as I have just done just before. That would be per micromole per day, for instance. But it's also possible to use an apparent degradation rate that would be per day. And in this case, that's the second line. I would have the apparent degradation rate. And to keep the units consistent, I would need to divide PCSK9 by a reference value, for example, the steady state value. Then a second example is if I have two degradation terms, I could have two different degradation rates, here this one and this one, but I could also parameterize it differently by defining the total degradation times the fraction that is PCSK9 mediated. In the second term, I have again the total degradation times the rest of the fraction. And in this case, I have total degradation and the fraction for each of the two ways to degrade. So in my case, I have decided to work with apparent degradation rates and the total degradation rate and the fraction. That's a somewhat arbitrary choice. Other parameterizations are also possible. So a small word about good practices. So it's usually not enough to just write the equations. It really helps if also for each term you really explain what they mean, so that it's easier to read afterwards. And importantly, also define the initial conditions. Pretty often these are completely forgotten, and actually they have an impact. And it's from the values from which you're going to start to integrate your OD systems, so they have an importance. Again, all these good practices are summarized in this very nice publication. All right, so now we have our model structure. What we need to do next is to collect some data that we will use to calibrate our model. So first, we have the phase 1 data. What has been measured is the total drug concentration, the total PCSK9, so the free and the bound form, and the cholesterol level relative to the population baseline. This has been measured for 3 different dose groups, dose levels, each time for 6 individuals, and I have extracted the individual data from the plot. So that's what we get from the phase 1. I have also done some literature search, and in the literature we can find information about mutants, either LDLR or PCSK9 mutants. And this is pretty interesting because actually mutants represent quite extreme situations, and having extreme situations allow us to really check that our model is not just able to reproduce the behavior of healthy individuals, but also some more extreme behaviors that are experimentally observed. So on the left, we have examples of the type of plots we can find in publications. And what I have done is to really summarize for all publications the PCSK9 concentration and the cholesterol concentration for different situations, so control, but also homozygous or heterozygous LDLR mutants, and again, heterozygous or heterozygous PCSK9 mutants. So the workflow that we're going to follow is to develop the model step by step. And as previously, I'm going to try to really split it in smaller parts to make it easier to handle, faster to run, and easier to understand. So I will first work on the PK model. Then I will add a PD part, and we will get our typical PK-PD model. Then we will complexify it a bit more to get a mechanistic PK-PD model. And finally, move on to the full QSP model. Once these three models will be ready, I'm going to use them to perform simulations in order to answer our three clinical questions, and we will see if the predictions are the same for the three models or not. So let's start with the PK model. So I'm going to open Monolix, that's our application for parameter estimation. And I'm going to directly load the first run, and then I will explain you everything I have done to run the model. I'll make this a bit bigger. All right, so the first step to set up a run is to load the dataset. So here the format of the dataset is a typical population PK/PD format, where I have individual data. So the ID column represents each individual. I have a time column, the amount. In the observations, I have the data for the total drug, total PCSK9, and the cholesterol levels. They are distinguished using the observation ID column. Units are just for me to remember what is what. And finally, I have a dose column that I can use as a categorical covariate just to stratify my plots. Let's first have a look how the data set looks like by opening it in the data viewer. In the data viewer, we see as a spaghetti plot our data, and I will first look at the total drug concentration. And what I can do is to go to the Stratify tab and allocate the dose groups, color by dose, so that we can really see the three dose groups. If I go back to the settings, I can also go on log scale, and what we see here is this slight bend downwards that really indicates that we have a nonlinear phenomenon, and that will prompt us to use a target-mediated drug disposition model for this data. We know that the drug binds to PCSK9. That's the total PCSK9 data. We see that we start from a steady state value, and then it's going up, and as the drug disappears, it's going back down. And for the cholesterol concentration, we see that as we apply the drug, cholesterol levels are going down. That's good. Then they go back to basal levels. And what I also see is a dose dependence. The individuals that got the highest dose seems to be to have a lower nadir compared to the individuals that had a lower dose. That's the data we're gonna use in order to calibrate our PK model. So I'm gonna click next. So next I have set up the structural model, and actually we have this nice library of TMDD models available. So I have just picked a model from the library. And to choose which model to choose, what I have done is to go to the online Monolix documentation, where we have guidelines for TMDD modeling. And in these guidelines, it explains that if the total receptor concentration is not constant, then I should use one of these three models here from the library. And actually, the total receptor concentration is the total PCSK9 concentration we have seen with the data viewer, and clearly it was not constant over time. So what I have decided is to choose the quasi-equilibrium model from the library. So I have selected the model from the library, Actually, the models from the library have only one output. It is the drug concentration. In my case, I would like two outputs, both the total drug and the total PCSK9. So what I have done is I have just added this small piece of code here. Our thought was already defined in the model, so I have just added it to the output list in order to map it to the dataset. The mapping has been done here. For the two observations IDs from the dataset, I have mapped them to the model outputs. Then I have set up some initial parameter values. And then I have run it, actually. So let me show you the plots. So I'm generating the diagnostic plots. And here what I see is the total drug concentration for each individual. That looks very nice. Observations versus predictions on log-log scale also look good. And if I'm looking at the total PCSK9, the total receptor, individual fits are also nice. And same for the observations versus predictions. So this looks pretty good. If I'm looking at the estimated values, I can see here the estimated value, and the relative standard error looks pretty reasonable too. So this is my PK model. Just as a side note, because the random effects for KD were very small, I have actually removed the inter-individual variability on KD. So that's my PK model. I now would like to add the PD part of it. So we go back to the slides. And I will first start with a typical PK-PD model. And what we need to do is to link the chemical species that we have in the PK model to our PD output, which is the LDLC that has its turnover with the production and the degradation. And actually, what we know is that low PCSK9 concentration leads to low cholesterol concentration. And from the biology, we know that it is the degradation of cholesterol that is affected, not its production. So what we can assume is that free PCSK9 will inhibit the degradation of LDLC. So when the drug is applied to the system, free PCSK9 concentration is going down. And this will mean that we inhibit less the degradation, we will have a higher degradation and therefore a lower cholesterol concentration. To implement this cholesterol turnover and the effect of PCSK9 in the model, it's very simple. We just have one line to add. It's this line here, where for LDLC, I will have a production rate and a degradation rate that will depend on R. And actually, R is a variable of the TMDD model that represents the free receptor. And then, actually, in the data set, what has been done is that LDLC is recorded as relative to the population baseline. The population baseline is at 160 milligrams per deciliter. So I have done the same transformation in the model, so that we're gonna compare things that are comparable. So let me open this second run. Wrong button. So I'm going to open run number 2. So data set is still the same. The model is as before, except that I have added the two lines for LDLC, so the ODE and the transformation. I have added to the output and mapped all observation IDs with all model outputs. I have set up initial values and then run everything. If I click on the plots, we can have a look at the diagnostic plots for this typical PK-PD model. And so the fits for total drug and total PCSK9 are exactly as before. So let's focus on the cholesterol. That's the individual fits for the cholesterol concentration. They look good. That's the observation versus prediction. It also looks good. And that's the visual predictive check, also looks very good. If I'm checking the estimated parameter values, they are here, and here are the relative standard errors. They are all reasonably small, so actually everything works well with this typical PK/PD model. We are able to capture the data, and we are able to estimate all parameters with good confidence. So everything looks good, but actually what I don't like about this model is that we know that pre-PCSK9 is not acting directly on cholesterol, but that actually there is an intermediate player. It is this LDLR receptor. So what I suggest to do is to try to complexify the model a little bit to take into account the LDLR receptor. So this will be our mechanistic PK/PD model. So the model looks like this. According to what we know from the biology, PCSK9 will bind to the LDLR receptor. This LDLR receptor is produced and degraded, and when it binds to PCSK9, it forms a complex that is also degraded. And then LDLR can bind to the cholesterol, and this again will lead to the disappearance of the circulating cholesterol from the blood plasma. In this process, LDL-C is, let's say, degraded, or at least it disappears from our compartment of interest, but LDLR is recycled back. That's why I have here highlighted put the arrow as a dashed line to indicate that LDLR is not consumed in this process. When the drug is applied to the system, the free PCSK9 concentration is going down. This means that there will be less binding to LDLR, so less degradation of LDLR. So LDLR concentration will go up. This in turn will lead to more binding to circulating cholesterol, which will be more degraded. So at the end, the cholesterol concentration in the blood will be decreased. So if we write this model into equations, it looks like this. And one choice that we need to make is about the parameterization. There is, as always for turnover models, different ways to parameterize it. So we can, for example, either use the initial concentration and the degradation rate, or the initial concentration and the production rate, the synthesis rate, or K-syn and K-deg. And then the third parameter can be calculated from this expression that we may turn around if needed. In my case, I have decided to work with this first parameterization here. First, because actually that's the parameters I'm really interested in. I want to know what is the initial concentration, and K-deg is related to the half-life, so that's really the parameters of interest. And then the second reason is that actually for those a bit more complex models, much easier to calculate K-syn from the two other parameters than the opposite. And this is actually what I have done here. So PCSK9 0, LDL-C 0, and LDLR 0 are my initial concentrations that are estimated as a parameter. These are my ODEs, and actually to calculate the production rate, the K-syn, what I'm saying is that the initial concentrations are steady state concentrations. Steady state means that actually there is nothing happening over time, everything is constant. So this means that the time derivative is equal to 0. So actually I can put this equation equal to 0 and then derive K-syn from K-deg and the other parameters and the initial concentration. And that's exactly what I have done here at the top. The parameter to estimate will be these initial concentrations and the K-degs. I'm inferring the K-syn values from the equations at steady state. If we look a bit more into the equations, for each entity, I have a production rate, and then I have two different degradation rates. one that just depends on that chemical species, and one that is related to the binding to another species. Of course, I also have L, which represents the drug concentration, and P, that represents the complex between PCSK9 and the drug. Here I'm reusing the same variable names as in the TMDD model. All right, so let me show you how this model looks like in Monolix. So I'm gonna, again, wrong button. I'm gonna open this run number 3. So still same data set. That's a full model that corresponds to what I had on the slides. I have set some initial parameter values and run everything. And we can have a look at the plots. So it's coming, because I'm sharing my screen, takes a bit longer than usual. So these are the individual fits for the cholesterol. It looks pretty good. And the VPC looks very good also. So let's have a look at the estimated parameter values. So for the fixed effect, it looks pretty good. But actually, when I'm looking at the standard deviation for the random effect, these omega parameters, I see that for several of them, the value for the relative standard error is very large, which means that the parameter is estimated with a very small confidence. So maybe I was a bit too ambitious. Actually, when I have set up my model, I have considered random effect on all parameters, and that was maybe a bit too much given the data I have. And actually, in Monolix, we have a strategy to improve the convergence that is called simulated annealing, and I'm talking about it because in this situation, it has an importance. So to explain you this in more detail, I will go back to the slide. So SAM is the algorithm we use to estimate the population parameter values. It works in 2 different phases. The first phase, called exploratory, really explores the parameter space in order to find the region of the maximum likelihood. The size of the explored space depends on the standard deviation of the random effect and of the residual error. Of course, if we explore a larger space, we have a larger chance to find the global maximum. So the strategy of the simulated annealing consists of constraining the variances of the random effect and of the residual error to decrease very slowly by maximum 5% between 2 iterations. So this means that the variances are kept pretty large, especially at the beginning, and this allows to better search the parameter space. So that's good. However, it also has a side effect, is that it may prevent the variances from converging to 0, and this may prevent us to really identify which parameters can have inter-individual variability and which not. So what we're going to do is that once you are in the right region of the parameter space, and this simulated annealing is actually not useful anymore, we can disable it in order to better identify random effects as well. So which parameters have or have not random effects. So to do so, the technique is to go first to the initial estimates and click useless estimates all, because then I'm going to be in the right region of the parameter space as the starting point for the next run. And then I'm going here to the settings for the population parameters estimated by SAM. And here I have these simulated annealing options that I can disable. And with these changes, I then run again. Here, all my runs take a few minutes to run. So that's why I'm always opening the run to show you the results directly without waiting. And actually, in this run, what we're going to look at is the convergence trajectories of the SAM population parameter estimation. So I'm going to generate the SAM plot, and we're going to look at all parameters at the same time. and really focus on the omega parameters that are here at the bottom. And what we see is that for KDEG PCSK9 and also KDEG LDLC, and all those three F parameters that represent the fraction going via the binding route or via the other degradation route, all these omegas converge to 0. The omega represents the standard deviation of the random effect, so if it's 0, it actually means that we have no inter-individual variability. That is what is estimated. So what we can do is to go back to the statistical model tab, and here remove the random effect for all these parameters. So this is what I have done. So I'm going to open the next run where I have removed the inter-individual variability. Actually, instead of loading the run directly, what I'm going to do is to show you the comparison of the two runs in Sycomore. Sycomore is our workbench application where you can really have an overview of all your Monolix runs. And here the two runs I have put in the comparison table is first the run with the random effect, and then the run without the random effect. And what we can see is that actually the likelihood value is very, very close for both, but because the second run has less parameters to estimate, it has a better Bayesian information criteria. So it was a good idea from a likelihood point of view to remove the omegas, the random effect on those parameters. We have a as good fit and less parameters to estimate. I can have a more detailed look into this run. To do so, I will click here on the M icon in order to open it, to open this run in Monolix. So Monolix is opening. And first, what I'm going to do is to check the plots so that we can see visually that our fit is still as good as previously. So here are the individual fits, ops versus spread, and VPC. And we see it's as good as before. If I check the results, okay, I'm sorry, I've done a last minute change, and actually I had my relative standard errors here, but because of the change, I have disappeared. What I'm going to do is to show you those values on the slide directly. And actually the values are here, and we see that now the random effects are well estimated, but we have two values here indicated as none, so not a number. So this means that the algorithm did not manage to estimate the relative standard error, and this is usually the case when it's pretty large and the parameter is pretty uncertain. Actually, I forgot one step, so I will go one step backward. What I would like to explain you is what happens exactly once we have removed the random effect. Actually, the SAM algorithm really strongly relies on the presence of random effects, and I will explain you this on the slide. Because when SAM evolves from one iteration to the other one, it really samples random effects, select the one that improves the likelihood, and use these values to update the population parameters. So if you have no random effect on one parameter, actually SAM is not able to update this parameter value over the iterations. So when we have no random effects, we use alternative optimization methods. The one that is used by default, we call it no variability. And actually what it does is that at the end of each SAM iteration, the parameters without variability are updated using a deterministic algorithm that is called the Neldemed simplex algorithm. So we have a mixture. We estimate the parameters without random effect, with random effect with SAM, and between each SAM iteration, we update the parameters without variability using this Neldemed simplex algorithm. It works well in most cases. In your case, you see trouble and have difficulties converging, you can switch to another method. The second method that is available is called add decreasing variability. What we do is that we add in the background random effects on the parameters that are known, and actually we're going to let the standard deviation, so the omegas, progressively go to 0. So we force them progressively to 0. This means that because they have random effects, we can use SAM as usual, but we still make sure that at the end of the estimation process, they are at 0, so there is no variability. And this is all done in the background. And finally, the third option is a mixture between the two. So it uses this add decreasing variability during the first phase of SAM and the no variability in the second phase. So I'm just explaining this because, in case you see that the default method is not working well on your case, you know that you can switch. And actually, to switch, you would go again to the settings here of the population parameters. And at the very bottom, that's where you have the 3 options. Okay, so we have done the run. That's the population parameters we have obtained. And as I said, it looks like we have quite a lot of uncertainty on the fraction for LDLC and the fraction for PCSK9. So what I have done to check a bit more what is going on is to run a convergence assessment. This is something that we have already seen yesterday and that I will quickly re-explain. So what we do is that we run the estimation several times, starting from different initial parameter values for each run. And these initial parameter values are picked within this interval. By default, it's twice larger, twice smaller than your reference value, but you can also set the interval by yourself. In my case, when I run this convergence assessment, if I look at the trajectories of each run, what I can see is that for most of the parameters that really converge to the same value, but I see that for the fraction for PCSK9, from one run to the other one, I can get pretty different values. And actually, I'm also concerned about the fraction for LDLC. At the end, they all converge to 1, but during the estimation, although all other parameters have already stabilized, is still moving around quite a lot. So I really would like to check even more what happens for those 2 parameters. And another way to assess identifiability is to do a profile likelihood. That's already something that we have seen yesterday. So you remember the technique is that for each parameter, we're going to fix the parameter to progressively larger and smaller values, re-estimate the other parameters, and check the likelihood. We can do this using the RSMLX package. That's what I have shown yesterday. But actually today, I would like more flexibility. I would like to really decide by myself to which values I will fix my parameter to check the impact on the likelihood. So to get more flexibility, I have used the Lixoft Connector R package. This R package is provided with the Monolix Suite installation, and it allows you to do exactly the same things as in the graphical user interface, but with R functions instead. But it really is the equivalent to the click in the interface via R functions. And here I've put the small code that I have written. So first, I'm going to load the library. Then I initialize the Lixoft connector. So this means that I will connect the R session to the Monolix Suite installation. That's how R will be able to use Monolix in the background. And then the first step is to load my reference Monolix project with the extension .mlxrun. Then I set up which values I would like to test. And actually, in my case, these fractions must be between 0 and 1, because it's a fraction. And they have converged to, uncertainly, but rather to high values. So I'm going to check values between 0.5 and 1, basically. And then for each value, I'm going to call this function from the Lixoft connectors, set population parameter information, and I will set the value of FLDLC to the value I want to test, and I will say this parameter needs to be fixed. When I run the scenario, it's going to estimate the parameters, all of them except the one that is fixed, and also calculate the likelihood. I can then extract the likelihood information and put everything into a data frame. This is for FLDLC, and I will do the same for the two other Fs also, and then I can plot. And what I can see in the plot is that here I have highlighted with the dashed line the lowest likelihood value, and then I have highlighted with the black line what would represent a significant change in the likelihood. As you remember from yesterday, that is a 3.84 threshold coming from the K2 distribution. And what we see is that for FLDLR, if we change the value pretty quickly, the likelihood is increasing. So it means that this parameter is well estimated from the data. But for the two other parameters, we see that there is quite a broad range in which actually the likelihood does not significantly change. So this means that these two parameters cannot be well identified given the phase 1 clinical data we have. But you remember, we have also looked for literature data, and actually that's some information we can maybe incorporate in order to have an idea to which value we would like to set those two F parameters. So for this, we're going to look into the homozygous mutants for the LDLR receptor. So that's the kind of information we get from the literature, where here we have found several individuals that have several levels of remaining LDLR receptor activity, and we have measured the cholesterol concentration for these different patients. And what we see is that if the LDLR receptor is completely shut down, there is no activity left anymore, we have a cholesterol concentration around 800 milligrams per deciliter. And actually, that's a very nice information, because if I'm looking at the equation for cholesterol, I have these two degradation terms. But I'm sure I have trouble estimating this F, but I can consider these mutants where actually LDLR is completely shut down. So this will completely eliminate the second term. I will have only one elimination term left. And with this simplified system, considering the data I can extract from the plot, we will be able to actually estimate what is a reasonable value for FLDLC. To do this, I'm going to use MLexplore, which is our application for model exploration here. And I have set up a script in advance that we can use directly to find the F values. So if I look at the structure of the script, actually, we have a section model where I have exactly the same model as I have used in Monolix. The only difference is that I have set here a KO parameter that allows me to actually shut down the production of the LDLR receptor. So that will enable me to simulate what happens in mutants. Then I have set up in the parameter section the parameter values. These I have got them from my last Monolix run. And finally, I have an output section where I define what I want to look at. This will be the cholesterol, PCSK9, and LDLR. Because this time I'm really interested in also what happens for the LDLR receptor, even if it has not been measured. So I can run this script. And actually what we see for the moment is a straight line. It does not look like this, but if you look at the scale, it's really just a straight line. Because we are at steady state, nothing is changing over time. And what I'm going to do is to set up the KO to 0 to simulate what happens in the LDLR homozygous mutant. In this case, I really see that the LDLR concentration is going to 0. And then I can see that with the parameters I have for the moment in my model, the cholesterol concentration is going to very, very high concentrations that are not realistic at all. But I know that this actually should be around 800 in this Newton. So what I'm going to do is to try to play with these FLDLC parameters that we don't manage to estimate well and see what would be value compatible with what we know. And actually you see that when I'm playing with the value for FLDLC, only the cholesterol concentration is changing. And that's a big advantage of the mutants in this example, is that they really enable you to split the model into two separate subparts that are not connected anymore. So it makes it much easier to work on one of the subparts without being influenced by the feedback mechanisms, etc. And here I see that when I'm playing with the value, so it's getting better and better, and it reduces it even a bit more. And when I'm around 0.8, I am nicely at the 800 milligram per deciliter concentration, as observed experimentally. So by playing here with MLexplore, playing with the parameter values, I can identify a reasonable value for FLDLC. I'll go back to the slide. And actually, we will do the same for PCSK9. So here I have summarized all the data for the mutant and the PCSK9 concentration. And actually, the data for the LDLR homozygous mutants is here. And it corresponds to high concentration of PCSK9 in the range 600 to 700. And here the logic is exactly the same. I'm going to have these two degradation terms, and this one's going to disappear when I simulate the LDLR mutants with no LDLR activity left at all. And this will help me to identify the FPCSK9 value. So exactly as before, I'm playing with the FPCSK9 value. And here for the moment, it's pretty high, and we will see it slowly decrease as I change the parameter value. I need to change it even more, up to 600 to 700. Okay, let's try 0.5. Yeah, that's pretty good, between 600 and 700. That's how I can identify the value for FPCSK9 using the information from the LDLR mutants. So now what I'm going to do is to do a new MonoX run where these two F parameters that I'm not able to estimate from the phase 1 data will be fixed to these two values that are found by using the mutant information. So to do so, I go back to Monolix, and I'm going to open the run with the fixed F values. To fix a parameter, actually it's pretty simple. You just go here in the initial parameter values, and then you click on the small icon here, and you can select fixed. And that's it. And then instead of being estimated, it will be fixed. And that's what I have done for the two F parameters. Actually, LDR 0 is fixed in all runs because it corresponds to a reference value that is not meant to be estimated. So when I'm running this, we can have a look at the diagnostic plots. So that's, again, the individual fits for the cholesterol. That's the VPC. It looks good. And if I look at the results, this time, all parameters have been well estimated. So we can consider this as our final mechanistic PK/PD model that I have estimated using both the phase 1 data and also literature data about the mutants. Now I would like to move on to our last model, which is the QSP model. So that's the structure of the QSP model. So it's a bit more complex than the previous one. In particular, it includes the hepatic cholesterol that is here. And actually, the hepatic cholesterol is considered to be produced internally, but it can also come from the diet, or it can come for HDL-C, is also degraded. And actually, the circulating cholesterol is coming from the hepatic cholesterol. And that's why it's important to consider the hepatic cholesterol. It also has a key role in this cholesterol metabolism. LDL-C can go back to the liver, either mediated by LDLR receptor or by other mechanisms. And what is important is that liver cholesterol has a feedback mechanism on LDLR and PCSK9 that is mediated by the SREBP2 transcription factor. So in this model, we have quite more parameters than previously. I have 7 parameters for the PK model, and I have 14 parameters for the PD. So 8 of them are just fixed. Here I have really followed the same strategy as in the original publication, and 6 of them will be estimated. And actually, the authors have done really an extensive literature search to find what are the typical parameter values, usually for healthy individuals. So what I have done is that I have taken these literature values as Bayesian priors. They represent healthy volunteers. And actually what we have in the phase 1 data are not healthy volunteers, but it's hypercholesterolemic patients. So what we're going to do is to set the value of healthy individuals as Bayesian prior, and then use the data of the hypercholesterolemic patients to update the parameter values and find what is a reasonable value for this phase 1 patient. So let's see how to do this in Monolix. So I'm going to open the QSP run. The data set is still the same as before. The structural model is somewhat more complicated than what we had before. If I open it in the editor to make it a bit bigger, actually the ODEs are not that complex, except that for hepatic cholesterol, we have several production terms and several degradation terms. What is a bit more complex is the different feedback terms with these regulatory functions that have kind of hill shapes and that are coded here. And then we have all these parameters to estimate, and the others, some others are fixed. In the initial estimate tab, so the parameters in orange are those that are fixed. They are fixed because we consider that actually we have found their value in the literature. That's, for example, the LDL particle size. And the ones that are in purple have the Bayesian prior. To set up the Bayesian prior, it's again this button here. We tick the third option, and then the typical value is the one that corresponds to the healthy individuals, and the standard deviation is the inter-individual variability that we think there is on this parameter. That's taken as the typical value and the width of the prior. And then when we run, we're going to update this prior using the data to actually find what are the values for the hypercholesterolemic patients of the phase 1 data. So I have run this. I can generate the diagnostic plots. You see that it progresses a bit more slowly than before because it's a more complex model, so it takes a bit longer to generate the simulations for the VPC. And what we see again are the individual fits for the cholesterol, the ops versus spread, that looks good, and the VPC is also very nice. If I look at the estimated parameter values, here we have the estimated values, and we see that some relative standard errors are highlighted in red or yellow or orange, so they are pretty high. And this is kind of expected. We have a pretty complex model, so even if we fix some parameters and some have a Bayesian prior, there is still quite a lot of uncertainty on some of the parameters. So that's the QSP model, more complex. So now we have developed 3 different models: the typical PK/PD, the mechanistic PK/PD, and the QSP model. And now comes a very exciting part. We will use these three models to perform simulations in order to answer the clinical questions we had. And you remember the first question was about the dose levels for phase 2. What we would like to do is to simulate different dose levels and different interdose intervals also, and then check which one enables us to fulfill the efficacy criteria, saying that we would like to have an at least 50 milligram per deciliter reduction in LDL-C, and also fulfill the safety criteria, so being above 15 milligram per deciliter. We need to be careful that when we simulate phase 2 patients, actually the patients that will be recruited in phase 2 will have, for most of them, already a statin treatment. So these patients will be different from the ones that have been recruited for phase 1, and this is something that we need to take into account when we perform the simulation. So let's check what are the differences between the statin-treated patients and the untreated patients from phase 1. So first, the difference is the levels for the cholesterol and PCSK9. That's a typical value from the phase 1 clinical trial. And we know from literature that for statin-treated patients, the cholesterol concentration is lower and the PCSK9 concentration is increased, usually by 15 to 25%, according to literature. So to take this into account, we really need to understand actually how statins are having an effect on the cholesterol metabolism. And by looking a bit into the literature, what we find is that actually statins induces this transcription factor SREBP2, which in turn increases the levels of PCSK9 and LDLR receptor. SREBP2 increases the synthesis of these two chemical species. And then in turn, because we have increased LDLR receptor levels, this contributes to lower cholesterol circulating in the blood. So that's something that is pretty sure. And then statin may also have an impact on the hepatic cholesterol synthesis. And actually, hepatic cholesterol synthesis has an impact on SREBP2. From what I understood, this is a bit less sure. So I have tried to keep it relatively simple. And actually, that's how we're going to implement the statin patients in the simulation. So first, for model number A, so the typical PK/PD model, actually this model does not include LDLR. And because statins have an effect on LDLR, it's not completely straightforward. But what we can do for simplicity is to just adapt the parameters corresponding to the concentration of LDL-C and the concentration of PCSK9, that in the model is called R0. We're going to adapt the value to the new value for LDL-C and to the observed increase mentioned in the literature. So that's for model A. Then for model B, actually this model includes the LDLR and the PCSK9. So what we can do is to just increase the production rate of LDLR and PCSK9, because that's really what the statins are doing. And we're going to choose the value of the change in order to recover this value for LDL-C and this value for PCSK9. That's how we're going to choose the parameters that enables us to represent the statin-treated population. And finally, in the QSP model, in there, we have the hepatic cholesterol synthesis. So what we can assume is that actually statins decrease hepatic cholesterol synthesis, and the strength of this reduction is calibrated in order to get the right cholesterol level as observed in statin patients. So what we need to do is actually to just do a simulation where we change the population parameter values such that they represent statin-treated patients, while in phase 1 we had untreated patients. So I'm going to show you the R script that I have set up to run this simulation. So I have used the Simulix function. The Simulix function is available in the MLXR package that is part of the Monolix suite. And what is very nice with Simulix is that it can reuse all the information from a Monolix run. And what you have to define is really just what is new. And this makes it very efficient. So what I have done is to set up the path to the Monolix run. Then I have defined the different administrations that I want to consider. So the dose will vary from 200 milligrams to 800 milligrams every 4, 8, or 12 weeks. So I'm setting the amount and the different times of the dose. Then I'm creating 5 different groups of individuals, each receiving a different treatment. In each group, we have 300 individuals. Then I will set up what I want to output. And actually, what I'm interested in is the percent change from baseline, or at least the change from baseline. So this is not something that is directly present in the model, but what I can do is to actually squeeze in a line of code in the model that calculates the LDL-C percent change and the change relative to baseline. That's the 2 strings that will be included in the model at simulation time. Then I'm defining what I want to get out of the simulation. So I'm giving the name of the variable and the time point. Here is where I'm going to work on the population parameter values. So I'm reading the values estimated by Monolix, and then I'm going to modify them in order to represent the statin-treated patients. Then I'm defining these new population parameters, and I'm giving everything into Simulix. So the Monolix project, so it will find in particular the model. Then we give the different groups of individuals with the different treatments, the population parameters for the statin treated, the output, and the lines to add to the model. So this takes like 1 minute to run or so. In order not to wait, I will load the results and plot them. I'm using the percentile MLX function. And here I'm plotting the LDL-C concentration for the different dosing regimens. And what I have highlighted with the black line is my safety threshold, my 15 milligram per deciliter. And what we can see is that actually all those levels are above my safety threshold, so they're all safe. What I can plot next is actually the change from baseline. That's this plot here. And the black line represents the 15 milligram per deciliter change from baseline that I would like to achieve. And what I see here is that actually only the dose that is given every 4 weeks achieve to really have most of the individuals below this threshold. All others are not frequent enough or not strong enough to really have a strong decrease that really lasts long enough before the next dose arrives. So these are the predictions for the typical PK/PD model. I will now do exactly the same for the 2 other models. The R scripts are very similar, so I will directly show you on the slide. So now we have big suspense. That was the result for typical PK/PD. What do we get for the mechanistic PK/PD model? Actually, simulation for the safety is very similar. All doses are above the threshold. And simulations for the LDL-C change from baseline, the efficacy, are also very similar. We also conclude that only the 14 milligram every 4 weeks achieve the efficacy criteria that we have. Simulations, so the prediction intervals that represent the inter-individual variability, are not exactly the same, but they are very close. And if I now simulate the QSP model, we actually see the same. These simulations are really on top of the ones from the mechanistic PK/PD model. All doses are safe, and only this one has the efficacy criteria. That was for the first clinical question. Then the second one was about comparing statin-treated patients and untreated patients. To answer this question, the simulation is very easy to set up. We're going to have 2 different groups. One will have the estimated population parameters as as estimated by Monolix on the phase 1 data. These are the untreated ones. And then for the treated one, we're going to do the same parameter change as for the phase 2, so as for the just previous simulation. And when we plot this on top of each other for two different dose regimens, we see that actually there is only a very small difference between statin-treated and untreated patients. So the patients that are already on statin will actually benefit quite a lot from the anti-PCSK9 therapy, as much as patients that do not have the statin treatment. That's a plot for the typical PK/PD. Plot for the mechanistic PK/PD is very similar. Here the two prediction intervals are really on top of each other, and same for the QSP model. So that's very good news actually. We really see that it does not really matter if we take a simpler or more complex model. We really have the same prediction and the same conclusion, and this really gives us confidence into our predictions. And then finally, the last question was about the simulation of familial hypercholesterolemia patients, which have these very low LDLR receptor concentrations due to mutations. To simulate those, actually in model A, I cannot really do this simulation because I don't have the LDLR receptor appearing in the model, so it's going to be very tough to modify the LDLR concentration. However, I can do the simulation using the mechanistic and the QSP model. And here we will just simply change the LDLR0 concentration and check what is going on. And the plot looks like this. So here on the x-axis, we have the LDLR activity normalized to 1. And here on the y-axis, the lowest LDL-C as a percent change from the baseline. And we see that if we have really a small percentage of LDLR activity that is left, we're going to benefit only not so much from the anti-PCSK9 therapy. And we really can quantify how much depending on the LDLR activity remaining. And then we can decide if it's worse or not, but at least we have the quantitative prediction. And the plot for the QSP model is also very, very similar. So actually, the answers to the clinical questions are the following. We have seen that the dose level that is best for phase 2 is 14 milligrams every 4 weeks because it fulfills the safety and efficacy criteria. Of course, we're going to also choose other doses, but at least we can really have a feel about what the result is going to be. Statin-treated patients really react as well as untreated patients to the anti-PCSK9 therapy, only a very small difference. And the patients with familial hypercholesterolemia have only a small benefit. That are the answers to our clinical questions. The answer to our methodological question is that actually all models give very similar predictions in this case study. This is good because it gives us confidence in the model predictions. On the other side, it also indicates that for this example, models of intermediate complexity are sufficient. We don't really need the full QSP model. To give you a bit an overview of the three models, I have put up this summary table. On one extreme, we have the QSP model, which takes pretty long to run, which requires quite a lot of literature search. And on the other extreme, we have the typical PK/PD model, very simple to set up and run, no literature search, but the drawback is that we are not able to answer all questions with this model. So my personal choice, if I would have to answer the clinical questions, would be to choose the intermediate model, which has really enough details to be really able to capture the modification we would like to do to answer the clinical questions by really modifying a bit what the parameter values or the model structure. And at the same time, it's really quick to run and simple to understand. So actually, I could stop and conclude here, but this publication has been published quite a while ago already. And in the meantime, the phase 2 data has been published. And here we see the mean percent change from baseline for cholesterol in the phase 2 for the several dosing regimens. So here that's average data for each dose group. So actually what we can do is to check where our model predictions correct. Do they correspond to this phase 2 data? So what I have done is that I have here plotted with the dots the phase 2 clinical data. And I have set up a simulation with exactly the same setup as in the clinical trial. So in particular, I'm using the same number of individuals as in the clinical trial. For the simulation, I'm averaging over all individuals. So this gives me one line. And then I'm doing replicates of this simulation, considering each time a different set of individuals. Each time I'm doing the mean, exactly as in the clinical trial. And the band that we see here in gray corresponds to the prediction interval for the mean change from the baseline as predicted by the model. What we see is that it strikes us really that the predictions are really very good, very in line with the clinical data. Here that's the predictions for the typical PK/PD model, and we see that for the highest dose, they are slightly below the data, but otherwise it's very good. And for the mechanistic and QSP model, the picture is very similar. Simulation predictions are also very good. In this case, it's rather the lowest dose that is slightly over-predicted, but overall, it's really, really good. So our model predictions were correct, and that's really good news. So my take-home messages for you are the following. First, build the model stepwise. It really allows you to have faster run, understand better what is going on, and you can always, at the end, put the different subparts together. Then it's important to define the scope of the model depending on really the questions you want to address. Of course, always carefully keep track of all model assumptions, the parameter values, and really be very precise in this job. And finally, assess the impact of the model uncertainty. Yesterday, we have seen how to assess the impact of the uncertainty in the parameter values, both those that are estimated and those that were fixed in the model. And we have seen that we had a huge impact on the prediction. Today, we have assessed more the impact of the model structure. We have considered different models. And in this example, we have seen that actually we were getting the same prediction for all three models. That's just one example, but it gives you a bit an example of a typical workflow and what we can do with QSP modeling. Thank you for your attention, and we can now take a few questions.
Thank you very much, Geraldine, for this webinar. So, of course, if you still have some questions, you can still type them in the Q&A window. So now, a first question a bit about your conclusion. Is there any way to evaluate if QSPs are needed and a less complex model is not enough?
So, I mean, really, it depends on what is the question you want to answer. I mean, we have seen here in this example, if I want to actually change the LDLR receptor concentration to simulate mutants, and I don't have this chemical species in the model, I cannot do it. So really, you're going to need to include what you want to really act on. So of course, you're going to need to impact the receptor on which the drug is binding, your really key PD output, what is in between also, and then there is no general rule. It's a bit try and play.
Okay, thank you. Then, when developing complex QSP models, do you use the standard options for the estimation of the population parameters in terms of burn-in, number of iterations of the exploratory and smoothing phase, number of chains, and so on?
By default, yes. And if I see that it's not enough, then I can change the settings. So these settings are available here. So the burn-in here phase, you don't need to change it. And it's really just to initialize the algorithm. It has no impact at all. What is important is mostly here the exploratory phase. That's where we really search the parameter space. By default, we have 500 iterations at maximum. sometimes it's not enough when you have a lot of parameters to estimate. If you see that at the end of your run, you have a message that exploratory phase has stopped without reaching convergence, then you can increase this number. And it's also important to visually assess the convergence by using the SAM trajectories. And really, if you see that one parameter is still drifting and has not yet stabilized when the maximum number of iterations is reached, then you can rerun by increasing the number of iterations. Concerning the other settings, I would recommend not to change them, except this, the method for the parameters without variability, as I have explained. Number of chains is set automatically here in the project settings. Actually, the number of chains is increased if you have less than 50 individuals. Yeah, usually I really keep it the same. That's a pretty tough setting to play with.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of computation cost, is there any recommendation on choosing the minimum number of cores, of clustered cores, to run QSP models efficiently? So by default, all calculations in Monolix are split over all the cores of your machine. If you are working on a server, the IT may constrain it, but by default, we take just all the cores available. The more cores you have, the faster it will be. So yeah, QSP models take long to run. So if you can get a larger computer with more cores, the better it is. Otherwise, you would just wait a bit longer. So you see, in my case, when I was talking about 1 hour for the QSP model, it was really the upper boundary on my very basic laptop. So if you get on a good desktop computer, it becomes much more feasible. Okay, about the simulated annealing part, when you disable the simulated annealing, does it affect the estimated values for the fixed effects?
I mean, they may be slightly different because SAM is a stochastic algorithm, so it will not take exactly the same path, but they should not change a lot in principle. But they can be a little bit different, yes. I mean, it depends. I mean, the fixed effect is also related to the inter-individual variability. So sometimes they can change a bit more. If the inter-individual variability, so the omega was very high, but very uncertain, and actually this was an artifact due to the simulated annealing, and in the next run it really converges to 0, then the fixed effect may change a bit more. So that is something, yes, to consider. It can happen.
Okay, thank you. So is it possible to use Monolix for mean data fitting without inter-individual variability?
Yeah, that's what we have done yesterday. So maybe you missed yesterday's session. So yeah, you can work on average data, and then you just remove all random effects, and that, yeah. So that's what we have done yesterday, and it works very well. And that's a very common situation in QSP modeling.
Okay, there is one question that asks for clarification for the method for handling no variability. How do you select the best method? Is there a method that is more robust?
There is no general rule. It really depends on your precise case. So, I mean, I usually keep the default method, and if really I have the feeling that I have a convergence problem, for example, the fixed parameter is suddenly going to very high value or very small value, and that's not really what I expect, then I switch to the variability in the first stage. Actually, I almost never use the add decreasing variability, because in this second method, the idea is that we force the omegas to go to 0, and because this process is slow enough, the fixed effect will have time to move and go to the right value. From my experience, it does not always work super well. So what I usually do is no variability as first trial, and if really I have problems, I switch to variability in the first stage. So yeah, thank you very much for attending this session. Good luck with your QSP modeling.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.